All right. So as folks shared, I'm here as a part of the Kahi OST team. I'm actually the evaluator on the team, and so I'm going to be presenting on evaluation today. And I think for the brief time that I'll be speaking with you all and sharing some information and resources, I think it's good to kind of set the stage and share that for this session, I'm going to talk about evaluation, maybe perhaps a little bit more broadly. We recognize that folks might be coming into this space with a range of experiences and background when it comes to evaluation, from not knowing what data is or what it might look like, to someone who's like, I'm in the YRBS all the time, so there could be a range. But we'll have opportunity in the small group discussion to be able to dive into some of the specifics and really engage in conversation around what folks are doing with evaluation. So with that being said, we want to start by kind of framing what we talk about when we say evaluation. And so the CDC has an evaluation framework, which is excellent. On the right-hand side of the screen, there's sort of their visual graphic that defines standards of evaluation and various pieces or components, like describing the program, engaging stakeholders, focusing design, etc. And really, the way that CDC defines program evaluation is a systematic method for collecting, analyzing, using data to examine the effectiveness and efficiency of programs, and as importantly, to contribute to continuous program improvement. It's a mouthful, right? I think a helpful way to think about evaluation is that, yes, it does all of these things, but ultimately evaluation is really more a process of gathering information and learning about the progress and the impact of the work that we do. Really, I want to emphasize this point on learning. So you all added in data and surveys. It's all a part of learning. So you can go to the next slide. Great. And I think core to that learning is that evaluation ultimately helps us answer our critical and curious questions that we have. And this is how we're able to learn about what we want to learn. And so what we're sharing here on the slide are examples of some questions, some evaluation questions that many of us have used and come across in the work that we do. But I think these questions can be really helpful when we think about work kind of across boundaries too, which is related to trying to understand and learn a little bit more about our audience, our program, and our goals, right? So when it comes to the audience, what does my audience need? Did we reach who we wanted to reach? Did we address the needs of our audience? And so for folks in the OST field, if there are folks working at the program level, this might be young people, it might be families, right? Are we reaching the young people that we want to reach? If we're working with a specific group of young people in a specific community, for example. If we're working at an organization level, we might be thinking about staff in our programs. If we're working across multiple OST programs, we might be thinking a little bit more systemically in terms of our audience as the actual OST program providers themselves, right? When we're asking questions related to the program, these might be the questions you all might be more familiar with, like, did it work? It's like the one ultimate question, which is really like, how was the program implemented and what happened as a result? Did anything change, right? Did young people increase their physical activity week to week? Are they eating healthier foods as a result of engaging in our program? What worked well? What can be improved? And ultimately, the goals that we have, we can use evaluation to help us define and think about, what does success really look like? How do we know it when we see it? And did we achieve our goals and objectives? And so these are really wonderful ways to ground the way that we think about evaluation, to try to, disentangle it from, the reporting and the overwhelming. And it really helps us frame what we want to learn. So you can go to the next slide. Now, the way that we go about answering those questions is we use evaluation methods and data. It's really just research methods and data. And I know this might be a little basic for some folks in the room because I saw a lot of folks talking about data, so you might be familiar with this. But when we talk about mixed methods in evaluation and in research, what we're talking about is primarily two different research methods that we use that mutually support and reinforce one another to help us answer the questions that we have. So quantitative research methods dealing with numbers and qualitative research methods dealing with stories, narratives, visual output, audio output, etc. And so both of these methods together really do a good job at informing in a very comprehensive way the answer to some of those questions that we just took a look at. And so on the right-hand side, you'll see kind of what I like to call the sort of usual suspects of evaluation methods and data. And so when it comes to quantitative methods, we might be thinking about secondary data analysis, which could look like, for example, school districts might have health assessment data for their youth. They might do school health surveys. Your local health department in your community or your city or county might also collect data. YRBS came up. YRBS is a great example of secondary data. This is data that you yourself don't collect, but it is collected as part of a sort of larger initiative. And so taking a look at that data to kind of see, like, YRBS is a great one because you're able to see sort of health risk behaviors and just health behaviors in general of youth in the specific area that you look at, versus doing something like primary data collection, which is collecting data yourself. If we think about quantitative methods, that could be something like surveys, which seems like a lot of you are familiar with surveys. We do surveys on this project. You've done our surveys before if you've attended previously. When we think of qualitative methods, we're thinking interviews, one-on-one conversations, focus groups, group conversations. They could also be things like document reviews, looking at research articles, reviewing media articles is one way to think about document reviews. Observations is another method, which is very, especially in schools, observations is a method that's used a bit more often in those settings. And then web analytics. We use web analytics, for example, for our work, where if you've been part of our sessions previously, we share obviously the HEPA standards, but we're able to kind of, assess how many people are really viewing the HEPA standards, downloading them, getting engaged. Are they clicking through to access the resources? So if you're engaged in a program where you're hoping to deliver resources to parents and their families, as well as young people, and it comes through on a website, what a great method to try to see, answer a question of, are we reaching who we're wanting to reach? So this is, again, generally just an overview of what we talk about. So you can go to the next slide. Now, in an effort to kind of, deconstruct evaluation from surveys, data, overwhelming, evaluation can be done in a very low effort way. We all have curious questions for the programs and the work that y'all are engaged in. And we all do really good work. So there's ways to capture that. And so you can still do evaluation in the everyday and in the day-to-day. And so what could that look like? These are some examples that we came up with as sort of low effort ways to collect data and facilitate that learning, right? So for example, activities with young people. There are so many ways to engage young people in evaluation activities. You could think about storytelling activities, like is listed on here, listening sessions. It's a pretty common way to engage youth in evaluation. Young people, you can gather them to create video testimonials, short story bits to reflect on their experiences in programs and in activities in the OST space using their words and their stories. There's also check-in questions during team meetings. If you're working kind of across OST programs and managing sort of staff, and you're thinking about organizations, if there are already in place touch points between folks who are engaged in the work, evaluation could be as simple as asking 1 or 2 questions in team meetings. How did that go? Right? Is there anything that we can do to improve for the next session? That is evaluation. You're collecting feedback data, and that helps us think about continuous quality improvement. So that's another very low effort way, is just, if you already have those spaces, integrating those kind of natural ways, couple minutes, right, to ask some of these questions. There are also many activities or many ways in which folks in the field, I'm sure obviously many of you all have so much more experience in this, special events, family engagement events and opportunities. These might be really wonderful in-person opportunities to briefly capture very brief feedback for folks that are there in person. It could be something as a very, very brief, like 3-question survey that might be done in person with families who are attending events, right? So this is a way to capture information in person. There's also virtual opportunities. And so if you've been a part of the COP before, you've probably seen this, or you've been on Zoom, you've probably seen this, but Zoom has a really wonderful feature to do Zoom polls. You can ask evaluation questions and collect data from Zoom polls. And very recently also, I think Zoom updated their feature. So now we're able to ask questions in a different way with different kind of response options. And so that's really helpful, because that can then improve kind of the quality and the richness of the information. So instead of just a simple poll, we can now ask questions and set it up where we can ask folks if they disagree, if they're neutral, or if they agree on a question or on an item. So that's really, really cool, easy to set up. It's very user-friendly, particularly, if you're already in a virtual setting. But there's plenty of other tools. There's Padlet, there's Facebook polls. And now I want to throw the question to you all in the audience. So in the chat, I'd love to hear if you've come across, or if you've used with some success, low effort evaluation tools that you found, hey, this worked really well. Any ideas of how to be creative with collecting data and learning? If you want to add that to the chat. And for others on the team, if you also have any other examples too, feel free to add that in the chat too. Maureen said, we ask open-ended questions in our reporting templates. Yep, to gather qualitative information. That's a great example of mixed methods in one tool. Bianca said, anonymous check-in box for folks to ask questions and provide feedback. Similar to Zoom polls, Menti polls, that's a great example. Kent said, we have an open survey that can be completed at any time to share program successes. That's a great example, Kent. I've come across that as well. Like, if anyone wants to share a success story, there's always the link, entering in the story. That's pretty cool. Well, thank you all for sharing that. And certainly once we get into our small groups and have some more conversation with each other, we'll hear about some more examples. So like is shown here on the slide, evaluation can be incredibly helpful when it comes to telling the story of impact and success, right? If we move a step beyond like the surveys and the data and the reporting, ultimately evaluation can be a really, really helpful critical friend to amplify the important work that you're all doing, because it is true as an evaluator with the folks that we work with, we know all of y'all are doing the good work and you know it's good work, right? So evaluation can help uplift that. And so what can you do to help to use evaluation to amplify that story, right? And to tell that story. And so some of the strategies here is you can think about posting evaluation findings or writing them up in a blog post or web article. You might be able to pull out some sound bites, right? Include them on an infographic or a social media blast. Our program served 200 young people in our district, and 95% of youth were able to engage in physical activity X amount of times a week, right? So whatever that soundbite might be, those are really helpful to kind of, amplify the success of what you're doing. But there's also really creative ways to think about telling your story with evaluation, like a podcast. I think that the idea that Kent shared, to have a revolving door of capturing success stories. You can develop a one-page brief. Those are really helpful for policy work, policy development. When you work with young people, you can get even more creative. I've done work before where the young people wanted to develop zines based on what they did in their programs. And so they were able to create short little zine notebooks that talked about what they wanted to learn about. And even photography, there's a method called photo voice, a research method called photo voice, where works really well with young people. They take photographs that are answers to the questions, right? So we might come to a program wanting to learn more about, like, for example, what would help you be healthy in school? What would help you, with your wellness? I'm just throwing out some example questions, and using photography to capture what that looks like, or what's an environment in school that helps me be healthy, right? And they're able to write captions, and you can do a photography exhibition. Like, there's a lot of creative ways to tell the story of what we're learning about. And how can it help you? Plenty of ways, right? Facilitating and building partnerships, strengthening partnerships, but also if you want to seek out new partners, there's certainly strategies to do that. Evaluation helps you tell the story, helps you make the case. Certainly for business development and grant funding, funders love a success story. I'm sure you all are very familiar. But you can also use evaluation in helping engage with families and young people in the communities that you're working with, to continue to share what you're learning with families, right? Like I mentioned, advocacy and policy development, they love a good number, they love a good story. So I think advocacy work becomes that much more energized with evaluation data and findings. And obviously all of these are in service of supporting sustainability. And just to plus one in the chat, Kate mentioned that the National After School Association has biannual After School Today publication, and that can be a great avenue to share your stories as well. So yes, yes, yes. And if we can go to the next slide here. So we're going to break out into our rooms shortly, but I wanted to share some distillation of some evaluation best practices for OST. And so the Wallace Foundation published a report called Measuring Youth Development, where they've really looked across OST programs to understand how programs are collecting data, how they're using data, what are OST programs doing when it comes to evaluation. Now, this is very recently published too, and I highly recommend that you all check this report out, and you'll get this after the presentation, of course. But they list a very comprehensive list of their findings, what they found across the OST programs, as well as their own recommendations. And so as an evaluator and in preparing for this, I thought, cool, but let's break it down even more. And so these are some 4 best practices that were distilled from this report and kind of, translated and made a little bit more user-friendly as well. And so first and foremost, walking through a logic model. Now, when I say logic model, that might be a triggering word for some folks in the room, but I promise that the process, even if you call it something else, can be incredibly helpful to, you know, work with your team and build that better understanding of the work that we're doing and achieving the goals that we have and the success that we want to see when it comes to the young people that we're working with, or the programs, or the staff, right? And so walking through a logic model is really helpful because ultimately it's a tool that visually helps you see, like, how does my program work? This happens, which leads to that, which leads to this outcome. And engaging in meetings with the folks that you're working with, either in implementing programs or managing programs at whatever level, can be incredibly helpful, because even just the process of going through the exercise of going through that process can help build some insight about the changes that you might expect to see now, or maybe, a couple years down the line. And so this is really, really helpful for OST folks in the OST field to engage in. Um, and then ultimately that helps to support the second piece here, which is to start small and do some testing, and that's okay. I think one of the findings they talked about in this report is that many programs are doing a lot. And sort of it's very easy to, get super excited and maybe bite off a little bit more than you can chew. But starting small and testing along the way can only lead to even a better process and better findings, better data, a stronger story at the end of the day. So this could be something like picking your top priority evaluation questions, the ones that you want to answer first, and maybe developing a quick survey tool to test it out, meeting with your team to think, okay, what did we learn? Do we need to change anything? This didn't really fly. This translation didn't really work, right? So testing is really helpful. And then establishing check-in meetings to facilitate that learning. It seems like a little bit of a no-brainer, but it's really, really important to have sort of a routine space to share what you're learning with each other, and importantly, documenting what you're learning. I think that was something that came out in the report, is that folks are checking in with each other, but I think could do a little bit more in terms of documentation, to sort of assess, okay, what did we learn this month with this particular survey that we tested, right? Even some examples in the chat, like how many stories did we get in June from this link? Do we need to get more next month? How do we want to do that, right? So having check-in meetings and documenting is really helpful, because then when you go at the end of the program or the project to look back and sort of tell the story of what you did and the progress and what you learned, those intermittent documentation in those meetings can be really key and critical. And finally, of course, engaging with your audience. We've talked about that kind of briefly. There's creative ways to include young people in evaluation, families in evaluation, other staff in evaluation. And there's low effort ways to do it. Like you don't have to be someone who's trained in research and evaluation for years and years and years to engage in this work. And I'll share too that folks who are researchers that are now kind of really prioritizing community-based work, when they work with program folks like yourselves in the room, like, you are the ones who are engaging in research and collecting that data and doing that data. So everyone can do evaluation, and I think can do a pretty good job.